All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're tackling Chapter 13, Approaches to Working with Young Children with Hearing and Vision Loss, and with Communication Disorders. So, to kick things off, I want you to just picture this for a second. Imagine you're watching your absolute favorite movie, right? But the sound is totally muted and there are zero subtitles. Or think about trying to navigate the crowded, super noisy hallways of your high school with your eyes completely closed. Like, how much crucial info would you miss? How frustrated would you feel? Well, for a lot of young children, navigating their early education environments can actually feel a whole lot like this. To help structure our deep dive today, we're basically going to look at four main buckets. First up, hearing loss and deafness. Second, speech and language delays. Third, navigating vision loss. And finally, the really cool stuff, the power of assistive technology. We've got some fascinating biology, psychology, and tech to cover, so let's just jump right in. Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, Hearing Loss and Deafness, Understanding the Challenges and Supports. So hearing loss is measured in decibels, and it can range from just a slight impairment where a kid might maybe miss quiet whispers, all the way to profound deafness, where they aren't processing spoken linguistic info at all. Now, to understand exactly where this whole process breaks down, we actually have to look at the biology of the ear. Check this out. Sound waves literally have to travel through the outer ear canal, smack into the eardrum in the middle ear, and then finally reach the super complex inner ear where the auditory nerve shoots the signal straight to the brain. Knowing this anatomy is absolutely crucial for educators because it helps us pinpoint exactly what's going on. Because that journey is so complicated, we generally see two main types of hearing loss. On the left, we've got conductive hearing loss. You can think of this like a literal physical roadblock, like maybe fluid from a typical ear infection or even just a buildup of wax. It happens in the outer or middle ear, and good news, it's often temporary. But even temporary loss can really mess with language development if it's not caught early. Then on the right, there's sensory neural hearing loss. This one involves permanent damage to the inner ear or the auditory nerve itself, usually from genetics, illnesses, or super loud noises. And yeah, you can also have a mixed type that combines both of those challenges. But here's a wild thought. What if the physical hardware of the ear works perfectly fine, but the software of the brain struggles to translate the data? Imagine trying to listen to a radio station that's just blasting intense static, with like 5 different voices jumbled together. That is exactly what Central Auditory Processing Disorder, or CAPD, can feel like for a young student trying to hear their teacher in a busy classroom. Technically, they have totally normal hearing, but they have an incredibly hard time processing sounds, figuring out where sounds are coming from, or filtering out all that background noise. Moving right along to Section 2, Speech and Language Delays, the Mechanics of Communication. You know, human communication is built on some seriously complex mechanics. When a kid has a speech or language delay, it massively impacts their social life and their learning. But before we can get into spoken words, think about this. How do we communicate without words? I mean, seriously, think about how much we rely on nonverbal stuff. Making eye contact, facial expressions, pointing, waving. We are literally saying so much when spoken words aren't on the table. For educators, spotting and responding to these nonverbal cues is a huge part of supporting kids with communication delays. Now, when we do look at formal language, you can pretty much sort it into 2 separate buckets. First, on the left, receptive language. This is what a child receives and actually understands. Like if a teacher says, "Hey, please hand me the red block," and the kid does it, boom, strong receptive language. On the right, we have expressive language. This is what the child can actually produce and say out loud to share their thoughts. Here's the kicker, though. Sometimes a kid has amazing receptive language, like they understand every single word you say, but they struggle big time with expressive language, meaning they just have a really hard time physically forming the words to answer back. Language also has a functional side, which we call pragmatics. This is all about the social rules and the context of language. Think about a kid with a language delay hearing an idiom like, "cat got your tongue," when they're being quiet. If they take that literally, that is a terrifying concept. No way they're going to understand what you mean. It just perfectly shows how incredibly confusing the social rules of language can be and why using super clear, direct, and literal communication is an absolute must for teachers. All right, that brings us to Section 3, Navigating Vision Loss, Adapting the Educational Environment. So, we live in a completely visual culture, right? That makes spotting vision loss early absolutely vital for a child's cognitive and social growth. Without sight, these kids have to learn how to process the world using their other senses, and educators need specific strategies to help them do exactly that. One major, but honestly frequently overlooked cause of visual impairment is cortical visual impairment, or CVI. The crazy thing about CVI is that the eyes themselves might look 100% healthy during a standard exam. There are no obvious physical problems with the eye at all. Instead, the vision loss happens because of damage to the visual pathways in the back of the brain. So basically, the brain is struggling to process the perfectly good visual info the eyes are sending it. Okay, so how do we actually adapt the classroom for these students? Teachers can use a really simple but super effective 3-step progression. Step 1, maximize room lighting. You want nice, bright light, but you absolutely have to eliminate any glare or weird shadows. Step 2, keep the environment consistent and clear of physical obstacles, so the kid can navigate safely without bumping into things. And step 3, provide tactile aids. Think braille or physical 3D objects so they can process info using their sense of touch instead of just relying on vision. Another huge help is creating high contrast between foregrounds and backgrounds, like using bold, dark, really big letters on bright white paper. This actually helps a kid maximize whatever limited vision they do have left. It honestly sounds like a really simple tweak, but I'm telling you, it's a total game changer for their ability to actually participate in class. And that brings us to our final stop today. Section 4, the power of assistive technology, bridging the gap for exceptional children. So assistive technology is basically any tool, piece of equipment, or service that helps improve the functional capabilities of a kid with a disability. And man, the options we have today are incredible. But here's the thing, tech doesn't always mean electronics. Sometimes the absolute best tools are low tech. For example, teaching babies sign language before a kid can even talk is just a brilliant intervention. Teaching preverbal babies simple signs lets them communicate early, which drastically cuts down on their frustration, helps them regulate their emotions better, and honestly just makes for way better engagement between the parent and the child. As they get a bit older, a lot of children who are deaf or hard of hearing will use American Sign Language, or ASL. And just to be clear, ASL is a complete language. It has over 4,000 signs, its own grammar, its own syntax, the whole shebang. Plus, teaching some basic ASL signs to typically developing peers in a classroom, it creates this beautifully inclusive environment. It literally allows a child with hearing loss to make friends, hang out, and feel like they genuinely belong. Now, for some students, we do use advanced high-tech hardware, like a cochlear implant. So unlike a regular hearing aid that basically just turns up the volume on incoming sounds, a cochlear implant actually bypasses the damaged parts of the inner ear and stimulates the auditory nerve directly. It is literally life-changing. But it's not a magic fix. It takes some serious commitment and specialized training for both teachers and parents to help the child actually learn to interpret these weird new electronic signals as meaningful sound. At the end of the day, whether a kid is using crazy high-tech devices like an FM audio system or just adjusting to a new desk layout, the most powerful tool an educator has is their own behavior. You have to adapt your instruction to meet the child exactly where they are. That means using a totally normal speech tone and volume. Shouting does not help, guys. Always provide visual cues when you talk. Get down and speak at the physical level of the child's face. Use a hand-over-hand approach to gently guide a visually impaired student through a new task. And maybe most importantly, always give these kids choices so they can build up their own confidence and independence. So, wrapping this all up, knowing the unique, honestly pretty tough challenges these children face, and seeing the brilliant ways we can step up and support them, how are you going to use this knowledge? How will you use an understanding of these exceptionalities to build a more inclusive world? Whether that's speaking up for better classroom acoustics, learning a few basic words in ASL, or just being a little more patient and observant of nonverbal cues, you have the power to make sure everyone in your community has a voice that is actually heard. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep learning out there.